Awesome. Nice to see so many people here. I've heard it said that there are three kinds of lies, that there are lies, damned lies, and statistics. Which of those do you think SLOs are? Something to think about. Hello, I'm Cail. I work as an SRE at a company called Octopus Deploy. We make a continuous deployment tool. If that kind of thing excites you, we've got a booth here. We'll have a booth all week at KubeCon. You can see me around the place if you like. At Octopus, I work in our internal tools team that looks after our build and test and deployment infrastructure. And this talk is about some of the challenges that we've had over the last little while. Now, I've got a confession to get out of the way at the start here. This is not a success story. It's about a series of problems that I've faced since I joined the company, and the teams that I've been in and have worked around have faced. And I hope that some of this might be transferable to your context, but maybe not all of it, but hopefully some of it resonates with you. The other confession I have to make, this is a low-tech talk. So if you've just come from the previous session, this is not like that. We are going to get to SLOs kind of near the end, but I wanted to spend a bunch of time giving you context as to why we thought an SLO was the solution to our problems. So some background. In 2020, I joined Octopus Deploy actually as a quality coach, kind of like a software tester. And the company, it was 70 people in total, not just software engineers, everyone. And I came in with my sort of tester hat on, and I had a look around, and I thought, oh, no. Builds were failing a lot. And I came in from my previous contexts and thought, well, 10,000 tests on every single commit, that's never going to work. And I've spent the years since trying to sort of convert that gut feel, instinctive response into something that the organization as a whole could understand and take action on. Was this problem important? Well, more interesting than that, like, why wasn't it being addressed? It was a bunch of wasted time, a bunch of people frustrated with not being able to make progress. So I started trying to find a better name for this. And I wasn't sure if there was a statistics term for it, so let's just go with the reverse birthday paradox. I knew from my past experience that this many, and I want to be clear, this was not unit tests. Most of those tests were more complicated and could fail in a bunch of different ways. This many tests were going to cause problems. And it was actually a colleague of mine, Paul Grady, who did a bunch of work, he was a data scientist, to do a Monte Carlo simulation to say, actually, this many tests, if you want an 80% chance of success, only 15 can be imperfect. And we had a lot more than 15 that were imperfect. So maybe we can frame this as, is the problem that the failure rate is so bad, or is the problem that we're not doing anything about it? And let's just run with that second one for a minute. Who is the we here? Is it my team? Is it everyone in software engineering? An analogy I eventually came up with trying to talk to people about this. Who here still works in an office? A few of you, all right. So you've probably seen this before. Anyone who hasn't worked in an office, a very common problem where people just dump mugs in the sink, right? We shake our fists at these people going, couldn't you see? Don't make the problem worse. But I had this moment where I realized, wait, we work on a monolith, and people are seeing these tests fail, and they go, that's not my problem, that's not my mug. They only saw their own little dish they were putting in there. The cognitive science term for this is local rationality. These decisions get made in a context, and they're not incorrect. We can't directly fix this problem. It's human nature to sort of only pay attention to the things that are in front of you. And so given we couldn't fix that directly, given we had production pressure, we need to ship code, one option that came up was, well, why don't we just put together a little group of people, give them some time, and put a project together. Go off and find the problems. Now, this didn't work for a number of reasons. First, human review of novel failure modes could not keep up with the onslaught of new things. In other words, the problem got worse while we were investigating why the problem was getting worse. And we couldn't just scale the team up, which brings me to the second problem. Who's heard of the Pareto principle? Now, hopefully 20% of you have. It's that supposedly 80% of the problems come from 20% of the causes. But that's not an ironclad rule. Not everything works that way. It's just a way to describe certain things. But we set out assuming that would be the case, that there would be some low-hanging fruit that we could dig out. and fix the problem. By the time the project had sunk its teeth into, really digging into these things, hundreds more problems have flown by. And we never saw a point where things step change improved. Also, in this time, the company was growing rapidly, 100 new people in a year. And those people were being very good software engineers and writing tests, thank you. But they were writing tests based on what they saw and replicating these problematic patterns in the test suite. Okay, the project hasn't worked. We see people writing tests they shouldn't. What if we get the group of engineers at our company that does static analysis tooling and tests for our tests, and get them to write some build time things that will weed out any kind of bad patterns? Well, we have a problem. The company needs to make money. And it's very hard for leaders to take engineers off feature work and onto this, where there's no guarantee of ever finding the whole set of what's wrong. So we can't do a project. We can't fix the 20% of problems. We can't do static analysis. What do we do? The best that we can do is to sort of chip away at the problem. And so our problem is now, how do we solve this consistently? Where do you start? And more importantly, how do you keep going? And this is where our technology choices start to enter the chat. We spent a bunch of effort, my team, working on little glue services that connected to the build server and the other tools that we use, and an open source tool called Report Portal, which, if you've not heard of it, is sold as this kind of test result history machine, but it also has a feature where it will take test output and try to associate them together when they fail. And this solves one of our big problems. How do we cluster tests not by name, but by underlying cause? So we build these tools. We have a complex system of software that shoves tickets in to teams' queues and has allocations and says how many times it's failed. And so the job's done, right? The organisation has the information in a format that it kind of understands, ticketing queues. That means they'll jump on the problem and fix it, right? Wrong. The prioritisation problem hasn't gone away. Teams are still balancing it against their feature work. And they might get to one or two of them at a time. But even with grouping by kind of underlying failure mode, backlogs are still growing. And also, this whole time, the build success rate hasn't really improved that much. There's been occasional step changes where some big problems have been solved, but it's still not the dramatic improvement it's not 80%, It was around this time I started to see people who had tenure or seniority or sort of both, these kind of technical leaders in the company, just flat out calling incidents when things weren't going well. And yes, that's effective, but you can't do that every single day. People get tired of it. But I saw that and I thought, that implies there's some sort of threshold where these people decide they want to take action. Completely in parallel to all of this report portal work, we'd been doing some work to trace our builds and tests, including emitting spans about test pass-fail rates. And this seemed like a good opportunity to take that data and send it into an SLO calculator so we could move from my gut feel, move past analogies, and maybe get something like an SLO that will really make a difference. So we designed an SLO for sort of test trustworthiness, right? And we needed to figure out what our error budget or, test failure budget should be. And how do you do that? Well, the easy answer, the simple name for it is backtesting. So we looked back at when those leaders had intervened and saw where those numbers kind of made sense and aligned with if people had just that implicit threshold that was there. And we landed on, big deep breath, 99.97% test pass rate on the main branch over a 28-day rolling period. Look, it's an SLO, well done. Wow. Sounds good, yeah? Sort of compelled some change in the organisation. Now, I'd assumed it would be self-evident, that people would see that and the not very good pass rate and go, 99.797 isn't enough. But they didn't. And this is where I have a third confession, that there was another problem the whole time that I hadn't considered. Me. Sort of. My opinion about this whole situation didn't align with the rest of the organisation. I was assuming the rest of them saw this the way I did. In other words, I had local rationality. My context was not shared with everyone else. And so the kind of painful lesson that I learned here was that I couldn't just force the company to rebuild its engine. Maybe the best I could do is give them a check engine light. Because we did eventually build an alert there that was a strong indicator for them to stop what they're doing. And it has fired, and it's been pretty uncontroversial. But this is a lot of work. Was it valuable? And each individual step we took along the way felt justified, felt reasonable. Human investigation, writing the glue services, coming up with the SLO. But I don't feel like I've won here. Was it a waste of time? I don't know if it's possible to know. Another lesson that I learned, or maybe relearned, is that there are no such thing as best practices. There are only good practices in a given context. And the reason I say relearned is because this is actually something I learned from the School of Context-Driven Testing. You can see it there in the bullet points. But I'd forgotten this in my kind of blind focus on trying to use metrics to solve my problem, or SLOs to solve my problem. Sometimes you just have to listen to what the organisation is telling you. And what I hadn't been listening to was that profitability was more important. Now, if you've not seen this before, this is something called the Rasmussen model of dynamic safety. It's a bit complicated. You can look at that term online to get more detail about it. But you can think of it this way. That little dot in the middle is, how people think about an organisation, and there are three boundaries that dot can move towards. Economic failure, when you run out of money; performance failure, when you can't do the things you need to do; and workload failure, when your people quit because you're working them too hard. I was obsessed with performance failure, with inefficiency of how we work. But the people whose opinions mattered were concerned the company was drifting towards profitability, economic failure, and were pushing back quite hard on that, causing prioritization decisions to shift in the direction of winning more customers. So, to summarise, SLOs are a handshake, not a command. You cannot use them to push an agenda. You need to make sure you've done the work to align people in your organisation before you just go blasting numbers out there and expecting people to change their behaviour. That said, some of the aha moments for myself and for many other teams were that the SLOs gave us a permission to not intervene. It let us say, okay, well, if that's not on fire right now, we don't have to do anything about that. I can just stop worrying about it. Because they will tell you when things get worse than they currently are. And at the risk of being a little bit philosophical, if you've read Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, this is a little bit like responding fast and slow, pun intended, because it gives you a really aligned signal about when it's time to switch modes between kind of dealing with stuff occasionally and then, oh, let's drop everything and run on it right now. And finally, what kind of lies do we think SLOs are? I mean, they're statistics, obviously. Or are they? In any case, I think they're a useful lie. So, thank you so much. Here's the slide you can take a photo of to prove your boss you've maybe learned something today. And I need to thank my team members. I'll just give you a second to take a photo. Thank my team members. They're on the sced, it's okay, for giving me the time to prepare and give this talk. I need to thank my partner who's back home with 3 kids so that I can be here. If this talk kicked off some trains of thought in your mind and you'd like to follow up with them, I'll be down here later on. I'll be on the booth this week for Octopus Deploy. These are my socials if you want to reach me afterwards. And I think I have some time for questions. Thank you so much. Probably not though. Are you leaving or asking a question? Question.
Thank you for the talk. Give thanks to your partner to let us be here with us. I feel mostly connected to what you're showing. I'm very passionate about SLOs. Have you tried implementing SLOs for specific services and not for the entire company? Because it looks like, from your point of view, feels like there's a lot of resistance. And maybe I'm talking also about myself here, But just trying to put the question to you, maybe focusing on some teams that are ready to implement the SLOs and grow from there,
Yeah.
not focus on the entire. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great point, right? That like possibly one of the reasons this didn't work is because it was too broad. And I kind of go into that with like, we ship a monolith, we kind of need everybody to care about the health of the build of the whole thing. So it is kind of shaped, if you think about this in SLOs for services, it kind of looks like we've done a big roll up to the top, right? But that's just our context. We don't have a microservices pattern where I can divide this up into smaller responsibility areas. But you're quite right that it is very hard to do organizational change at a very high level.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the talk. I recognize a lot of the pain.
Thank you.
Currently dealing with a system that's about 80% available. Really wondering how you would start. Basically, when do you start ringing the fire alarm, right? Because 80% to me is very low, but to some business leaders, it's been acceptable.
That is the hardest question to answer. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this is to maybe help people in positions like yours. You're not the only one who's felt that dichotomy between I'm very passionate about the kind of service health of the things that I'm responsible for, but I look at an organization who's making decisions that I don't agree with. And the only advice I can give you is thinking back to this diagram is try to bear in mind that there are people at your company whose job it is to keep it alive. I mean, I don't know if you work for a for-profit organization or not, but these constraints are here whether we're aware of them or not, like consciously aware of them or not. And I had to build a lot of empathy with the executives and kind of senior leaders of the company who were making these prioritization decisions that I didn't agree with, because I could see that, okay, my opinion about what we should do here is in conflict with what they want to do. And it's not that I'm wrong because I'm lower down the chain than them, but more that the viability of the company was at stake, and decisions had to go the way they had to go. One of the things so I'm an SRE, one of the reliability engineering sort of principles is like, don't make things more reliable than they need to be, right? And so you can kind of feed that question as like, well, how reliable does this thing need to be? And if you're at 80% and you're getting paid, maybe that's okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think that's all the questions. Otherwise, come see me afterwards. Thank you so much.